Hello and welcome to the latest episode of EnvCast. EnvCast is a Society for the Environment podcast, bringing you environmental professionals in conversation each month. My name is Phil Underwood. I'm the engagement manager here at the Society for the Environment. And this month, we're going to be delving into the world of forestry. Our podcast is designed to provide insight into the lives of registered environmental professionals, featuring experts from a wide range of sectors and disciplines. We explore what they do, why they do it, how they got to where they are now, and their future ambitions. Each guest is registered with us as a chartered environmentalist, registered environmental practitioner, or registered environmental technician via one of our professional body partners, known as our licensed members. As such, they have each been externally verified to confirm that they are committed to good practice in the environmental work that they do. To learn more about the Society for the Environment, our environmental registrations, and our licensed members, visit socenv.org.uk. That's SocEnv.org.uk. Today, I'm delighted to be joined by Stuart Wilkie CEnv. Nearly 4 years ago now, Stuart registered as a chartered environmentalist via the Institute of Chartered Foresters, or the ICF. So good morning, Stuart.
Good morning.
Thank you very much for joining us on EnvCast today. First of all, where in the world are you joining us from?
I'm joining you from Strathbran, which is about 5 miles outside Dunkeld in Scotland. Dunkeld is itself about 15 miles north of Perth.
Okay, excellent. Now, I must admit, to start off with, you've managed to foil my standard guest research approach of using LinkedIn as my initial source of information by not having a LinkedIn account. But I won't hold that against you for now. We're going to find out a bit more about you as we go through this podcast. As with every EnvCast that we do, I'm going to hand over to you to tell us a little bit about what you do in your day job. So over to you.
Right. My day job is Certification and Environment Manager with Scottish Woodlands. Scottish Woodlands are a full-service forest management company. So we deal with everything, if you like, from the seedling to the sawlog. The turnover of the company is in excess of £100 million. And basically, I lead on anything that's vaguely connected to the environment.
Okay. Anything that's connected to the environment. That could be quite broad.
Especially in forestry, because almost everything we do is connected with the environment, because we are basically managing in the environment. Yes,
quite right.
So, that can be anything from pesticides through to forest certification, which is a major part of my role, and making sure that the company's group scheme is running properly. So we certify timber that we sell to FSC and PEFC standards. So that's a big part of the job. Diffuse pollution from incidents from oil spills, anything to do with the environment, it comes into my brief. Yeah. So it's quite a wide brief, yeah.
Okay, and it's Scottish Woodlands, so are you landowners? You have pockets of land?
No, Scottish Woodlands don't own, well, they own little bits and pieces of forestry, okay. But by and large, we are a company providing services to private landowners who own woodland. And that may be anything from pension funds and institutional investors through to private individuals and farmers. So we're providing a professional management service to owners of trees.
Okay, interesting. So how did you get to become, or get to the point of being, am I right in saying environment and certifications manager? Is that right?
Yes, that's right, yes.
How did you get to that point?
Basically through a long career in forestry as a forest manager. I started off not with Scottish Woodlands, but as many other people do, around 2 or 3 companies. But I came to Scottish Woodlands 22 years ago, and it was 14 years as a forest manager with Scottish Woodlands before the opportunity to take this role on came up. Their role was originally as a certification manager running the group scheme, but since I took it on, we've broadened that out quite considerably since then. So my background is very much as a forest manager. Yeah.
Has the role broadened out because of the approach, the different approaches of the business, or is the world of forestry changing, or is there more of an environmental focus to it?
I think there's always been an environmental focus to it, but like every other industry, we have had to change and adapt as the environmental agenda has grown. And when I look back over my career to the things that we were doing in the 1980s, they're completely different from the way we'd approach things now. I don't think that's different from any other industry, but the environment has come right up the agenda,
which can only be a good thing as far as we're concerned. So that's good. So we talked slightly a bit about your career going up to where you are now. In terms of your education and qualifications, was there anything that particularly helped you on your way towards your roles in forestry?
Well, I think in terms of coming into this role, it was very much the background that I had as a forest manager. Because I think it's really important to this role that whoever does it understands what their colleagues are actually doing on the ground. If we were recruiting somebody into this role today, we'd probably be looking for a graduate. Well, I'm a graduate myself, but I don't think that was the thing that really got me into this role. But we'd be looking for a graduate, member of the Institute Charter Forest, ideally, and somebody that we felt we could train and had the enthusiasm for the role. So I think it's not so much about hard qualifications as much about the enthusiasm, I think, as well, and background knowledge.
Okay, good to know. Yeah, the experience of the mix of experience and the theoretical knowledge is something that links into chartership, for example. So yes, we certainly understand how that works. Would I be right to say that you're a chartered forester as well?
I'm a fellow of the Institute Charter Forest. Yes.
Yeah.
And a graduate in ecological science with honours in forestry many years ago now. Yes.
Okay, so quite specific to forestry from your university education.
Yes.
Okay. You're not like me, where I graduated in something and now I'm doing something entirely different. But yes, that seems to be a case in many different walks of life. So what parts of your current job do you find most interesting?
Oh, I think there isn't really a bit that is disinteresting, I would say. There is a lot in there. I suppose that the core of it is the certification side, the forest certification, making sure that the forests that Scottish Woodlands manage meets the requirements of UK Woodland Assurance Standard and hence FSC and PEFC, which involves a lot of effectively auditing. As much mentoring of the staff as is actually auditing them, what they're doing. So that's a major part of the role, and it's the bit that gets me out into the woods more often than not. So that's very much one of the more interesting parts. But equally, getting involved in things like the Hylobius management program, which is looking at ways of moving the insecticides that we use in forestry and replacing those with alternative means of weevil control. Getting involved a bit in tree breeding and trying to improve the quality of the conifers that we plant. Working with the Upwith steering group to actually develop this certification standard. There's a whole wide range of things that I get involved with that really are quite interesting and stimulating.
Okay. Now, certification certainly sounds like it's a core part of your role.
Yeah.
Now, forgive my lack of experience here, but what does certification mean? What in terms of forestry certification, what does that, if you have the certificate, what does that tell somebody?
Right. There are two main forest certification schemes in the world. There is FSC, or the Forest Stewardship Council, which most people have heard of, and there's also the Programme for the Endorsement of Forest Certification, or PEFC. They both are global certificates, and they are effectively assurance standards that the timber that you are buying has come from a sustainably managed forest. And my role within Scottish Woodlands is to make sure that the forests that we manage meet those certification standards. In the UK, we are very fortunate that we have one certification standard that meets both FSC and PEFC's criteria, and that's called UCWIS, or the United Kingdom Woodland Assurance Standard. And that's the standard that I also help to develop, as well as implement on a daily basis.
Okay, and I guess to class as a sustainably managed forest, that's all sorts of different things that come under that, which you've probably just touched on in terms of pesticides and so on, and all sorts of things.
All sorts of things. I mean, there are requirements written in the standard. There are about 100 of them that every forest needs to meet, and that's everything from complying with the law to reducing pesticides, looking after conservation interests, and so on. So it's a huge range of stuff that's in the standard. Yeah.
Okay, it's a pretty broad role. Lots of knowledge going into that, I imagine. You've very briefly actually mentioned it, but I was going to ask this anyway. It's a bit of a strange question, I suppose, but do you actually get to see many forests in your role?
Yes, I do. And obviously, over the last 12 months, I have seen fewer forests than I would have liked to have done.
Yeah.
But normally, I would be out in the forest 2 to 3 days a week, see what's going on. And that's where the action is, So that's where we've got to be. You can't do everything from behind a computer desk.
No.
Though I seem to spend too much time sitting in a seat looking at a screen. Yes.
In the kitchen these days. Yeah.
In the kitchen these days. Yeah.
Well, in terms of those parts of the job that you find most interesting, which is, by the sounds of it, everything, which is great. That's in terms of finding the jobs that you want to do, finding everything interested in that job has got to be a goal for everyone, really. But do you think those elements that you find interesting now are what you expected when you first started your forestry journey?
In some ways, yes, and perhaps in some ways I've come more of a full circle. Well, the reasons that I went into forestry in the first instance are in some ways coming back, or have come back in the last 8 years in this role. I wouldn't say they ever got lost in the intervening period, but perhaps as a frontline forest manager, there were other pressures that came to bear. But in this role, certainly, in some ways, I'm revisiting those reasons why I went into forestry in the first place. Okay,
good. What came first? You're interested in forestry or in the environment, or were they both linked straight away?
Think probably marginally the environment, but they are both linked. I think I can probably look back to childhood days and summer holidays in Wester Ross in Scotland. We were fortunate enough to be able to spend a month in the little village of Gairloch in Wester Ross, which at the time was pretty much a self-sustaining community. It had its own baker, its own butcher, its own dairy. A lot of that's changed now, and everything's imported from the rest of the planet. But I remember going wild fishing in Highland Lochs with my dad, and he would row us in a boat away to the furthest corners of Loch Dhu, where you can see no habitation at all, just the great Torridon Hills rising behind it. I remember seeing my first golden eagle overhead. And I can remember when the Colin Glas Lefra nature trail was opened at the Benny Nature Reserve, climbing up into it and having glimpses into the distant mountains. And I guess all that kind of just seeped into me, unknowing. But it wasn't really until I went to visit Currachtree Forest, which is at the other end of Scotland, down in Dumfries and Galloway. And we were on just a standard Forest Commission walk. And I can remember coming across a clearfell site and the logs stacked at the side of the road on a warm, sunny day. And at the time, the big environmental issue, and we're talking early 70s, was the Amazon rainforest being felled in large chunks. And it struck me at the time, I think it was probably about 14, that here was a career where you could actually produce a utilizable timber on a sustainable basis and perhaps do something about saving the rainforests around the world. Well, sadly, that last bit hasn't happened, but I'm still convinced that the way forward for the planet is the sustainable production of timber. And that's where I've kind of come back to, yes.
Yeah, I guess that's opportunity for change it's still there, I suppose, but we're so much further down the wrong path currently, I suppose. Even though there are initiatives such as what you guys do to try and stop that. Interesting to link that localized interest straight back to the Amazon rainforest. That's that really gets your brain ticking, I suppose, to the impact that you could have. I think I've been to Gairloch.
Yes,
I think I went around the North Coast 500. Would
yes,
that
you
go?
would have got to Gairloch. Yes.
Yes. Okay. I must admit, I think I went to about 20 places within 10 days. I can't remember which ones I actually went to, but never mind. I'm sure it's very nice. So that's probably that's where your first interest in the environment comes from anyway. So that's good to know. Now this, I've pinched this from something I've seen elsewhere actually, but forestry, some people's opinions possibly might think initially, hairy men, check shirts, possibly. They're very stereotypical. But I can tell by the pictures on the Scottish Woodlands website that that image is not 100% accurate, it's fair to say. So that aside, what are some of the variety of opportunities and job roles in forestry at the moment?
Yeah, Monty Python didn't do the forest industry much of a favour with I'm a lumberjack and I'm okay.
No.
But yeah, there are huge opportunities throughout the forest industry. I think probably at the moment 15 to 16% of Scottish woodlands foresters are female now, which when I went to university, with one female forester on the course of about 30. Say now we've probably 50, 60% of our staff are female foresters, predominantly younger ones, of course. But yeah, there are huge opportunities right across the board for anybody. In fact, at the moment, the forest industry is actually desperate for graduate foresters or graduates in the environment. We could take on as many almost as are available. We run a graduate development program every year with 4 or 5 young graduates on that, and have been for 3 or 4 years now. Because the forest industry really needs new blood.
And for those thinking about it, I'm going to highly assume that you'd recommend it.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, it's been a great career for me, especially if you want to work, predominantly outdoors in the environment, really making a difference. Then forestry is a great career from that point of view. Yes.
Okay, and we've spoken about the diversity changing from the time that you've been in forestry. Is the world of forestry changing elsewhere? I guess technology is playing a huge part. Science and development of different areas of knowledge in that sense.
Yes, certainly. I mean, when I came into forestry, most people were felling trees with chainsaws, and now chainsaw has almost disappeared. But for a very specialist sector, is all mechanized now. So there have been huge changes, and there will continue to be huge changes in forestry going forward. And the way that we plant and manage our trees has changed immeasurably since the 1980s. We're now planting much more diverse forests than we were planting in those days. Yeah, big changes.
I guess that's not just for increasing yields, but there's a lot more to it than that, I guess.
There's a lot more about bringing biodiversity into the forest, bringing resilience into the forest to climate change and new pests and diseases. A whole range of things. We are developing much more diverse, much more productive forests. I mean, one of the thrusts that we've gone down the road of is developing strains of the conifer trees that we use that are more productive, so you can get the same production from a smaller area, but that frees up proportions of the forests for biodiversity and making them much more sustainable, much more resilient.
Interesting. There's so much to it, isn't there? It's not just about planting trees. So it's a sector full of interest for me, at least.
Yes.
Very interesting. Now, the environment agenda is pretty huge at the moment, and hopefully it'll increase. And given that COP26 is coming to Scotland quite soon as well, hopefully. Now, the interest in trees, or the subject of trees, is quite high at the moment in terms of the agenda. And there's been, promises of the planting of billions and billions of trees across the world. From an environmental point of view, Why would governments agree to that kind of thing?
Well, the carbon agenda, of course, is one of the biggest things regarding new tree planting. And if you designed a simple machine to pull carbon out of the atmosphere, then you'd probably come up with a tree. It sits there, it does the job it's supposed to do. But it's not just about carbon. I think for every ton of steel we produce, we release 2 tons of carbon in the atmosphere. I think for concrete, it's for every 7 tons we release a ton, that sort of figure. Whereas for every ton of timber that you produce sustainably, you remove half a ton carbon from the atmosphere. So, I can see that going forward, there will be a much greater drive to replace steel and concrete with timber. So it's not just about planting forests and removing carbon from the atmosphere. It's actually about embedding that into buildings and bridges and everything else. Wood is a fantastic material. It didn't make fighter planes in the Second World War out of Sitka spruce for nothing.
Okay, I didn't know that. There you go. It's got so much versatility to it, hasn't it? And by the sounds of it, you'd be quite keen for the use of wood to continue in a more widespread way.
As I said earlier, that was one of the drivers that actually brought me into forestry, is the fact that you can produce this stuff sustainably, rotation after rotation. And that hopefully will take pressure off the really important natural forests around the world. Obviously the Amazon basin, but also in Indonesia, Equatorial Africa, and indeed in the northern hemisphere, boreal forests, temperate rainforests around the planet as well. There's very little old growth forest left in Canada and United States now. And that's just as valuable in its own way as the Amazon basin.
What kind of risks are involved if trees are planted in the wrong way and there's billions of unmanaged trees and so on?
Well, as we've seen with ash dieback in the UK, pests and diseases can have an enormous impact in a very short period of time. And even in my own lifetime, we've also had Dutch elm disease wiping out elms. So we need to be very, very aware of that. More recently, larch with Phytophthora as well has pretty much been not necessarily wiped out, but it's not a tree that we would use in forestry now until we've bred some resilience. But that breeding of resilience, importance of biosecurity, all those things are going to become ever more important. When you look at the way that we, in fact, COVID's a perfect example about how quickly we can move a disease around the world in this day and age. I mean, that never used to happen. But now that we're all jumping on planes and flying around the world, COVID moved around the planet within a month. And it's the same with tree pests and diseases of crops. We need to make sure that we get the biosecurity right.
Quite right. We're not the only things that are globetrotters. Trees are as well, and they carry their own problems and opportunities, obviously. But now let's bring it back to you again, rather than global issues. You obviously a few years ago became a chartered environmentalist. What gave you the inspiration to do that?
A number of things. I think in some ways it's about pinning your colours to the mast. If that's the right expression. It's saying, this is who I am and what I stand for. I think that was part of the motivation. The other part of the motivation is probably much less highbrow, and the fact that a lot of major companies now, when they're putting together their PQQs, are looking at the environmental credentials of an organisation. And we do quite a lot of large-scale tenders, for trackside clearance of trees along railway lines to Network Rail and the likes. And they're very interested in not just the price for the job, but the health and safety, the environmental, and all the other aspects. So having a chartered environmentalist and what that brings to the tender is certainly a help. So there's sort of 2 or 3 motivations in there, but I think personally it was, it's pinning the colours to the mast and saying, yes, I'm an environmentalist, and this is what I stand for. And that helps in many ways. And when you're just out in the forest, the other day, just last week, I was out in the forest and I found an old blue container that was lying about, and I picked it up and brought it out of the forest. It was just lying in the middle of nowhere. And on the way out of the forest, I passed a couple of machine operators, and we stopped and had a chat. And the fact that I had bothered to take this out of the forest with me just sends a little signal to them about litter and so on. So it's little things like that actually are quite important.
Yeah, and that shows your the caring part of being a chartered environmentalist, as well as having all the theoretical knowledge and experience, to actually make those steps, however small and large they might be. As part of being an environmental professional, and something you'd probably expect from a chartered environmentalist, I imagine. Good. Okay. And so it sounds like it was certainly an individual, something you want to do as an individual, but from a business point of view, also very useful. And that is something that a lot of people find. So it's good to hear that that's actually the case. Chartership has numerous benefits. And I guess from those benefits that you've mentioned, it's something that you might recommend to others doing.
Absolutely. I think I would hope that some of my colleagues will follow this route within Scottish Woodlands. We have a fair number of institute members, and they can follow this route. And at some time, I'm going to not too distant future, I'm going to have to start breeding the next generation of environmentalists in Scottish Woodlands, people to take on this role. So they will hopefully become members of the Society for the Environment. Yeah.
Absolutely. Well, we will certainly support with that if we can. Now, I think from what you've just said there, you've touched on it a little bit, but I was going to ask, does your interest in the environment span beyond your forestry professional role? I guess the example you gave a moment ago probably says yes.
Yes, indeed. And into the kind of things that I do in my spare time as well, whether that's climbing the mountains of Scotland or even doing a bit of gardening. I have a little heritage orchard that I've planted in the last couple of years next to the house here with heritage varieties of apples and pears and things. So just little things like that just spill over outside, yeah. Excellent.
Any favourite mountains you can recommend climbing?
Any favourite mountains? I guess going back to what I was saying about Gairloch, one of my enduring childhood memories is coming over the crest to Glendocherty above Loch Maree and looking down to Ben A. And the end of Ben A actually looks like a sleeping dog. If you ever, it's one of these things, once you've seen it, you can't unsee it, but it's difficult to see in the first place. So I guess Ben A would be a favourite mountain. But there are many, many beautiful mountains in Scotland. I suppose Ben A was the first mountain that I really sort of remember from a childhood.
Well, I'm going to note that one down and see if I can get there at some point.
Yeah.
Okay, well, I think we're going to come towards the end of this particular EnvCast. But as we ask every one of our guests on here, if you were able to influence world leaders for a day, what would you get them to do or think about?
I sometimes think we give world leaders more credit for having influence than they really have. From women's suffrage to Me Too, from Black Lives Matter, Extinction Rebellion, and even that Blue Planet moment, I think real change is actually driven by ordinary people and what we want. And in many ways, what a successful politician does is he actually grabs the zeitgeist of the moment and follows it. So I guess what I would say to world leaders now is, if you're going to COP26, listen to what people are saying and be bold.
Take action from what people are actually saying around the world. Okay, good answer. We get some interesting answers, a variety of answers. So it's always interesting to hear. Well, that brings our podcast to a close. So thank you very much, Stuart, for joining us today. And we wish you well with your future endeavours.
Thank you very much. Hope
Thank you.
people find it interesting.
Thank you for listening to or watching our latest EnvCast with Stuart Wilkie, Chartered Environmentalist. If you're curious to hear more about the Chartered Environmentalist, Registered Environmental Practitioner or Registered Environmental Technician registrations, please take a look at our How to Become and Why Become recorded webinars on our website at socenv.org.uk. Or you can find them on our YouTube channel. Just search for Society for the Environment, where you will also find a variety of different insights from our registrants. You can also follow us on Twitter at SocEnv_HQ to find out more about what we do and to keep up to date with the latest Society for the Environment news from our registrants and beyond. We release a new episode of EnvCast on the first Wednesday of each month. So if you're interested to hear more from our podcasts, please subscribe to hear more from us. You can subscribe and review through a variety of platforms such as Apple Podcasts, Spotify, and Castbox. Thank you for listening or watching on YouTube. We very much look forward to seeing you on the next episode next month.